What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Jenks Island podcast, the only NFL podcast where your takes from washed-up Division III cornerback and his friends. I'm your host, Grayson Jenkins, joined again by my great friend and co-host, Ty. In today's episode, we're breaking down the NFL schedule that just released yesterday, and then I will be posting this episode basically as soon as we're done recording so I can get it out as fast as possible to you guys. We're recording this Friday. It's almost 4 o'clock, so I'm going to try to get it out by 6-ish for everyone out there. But the schedule release came out yesterday, and there's a good amount to talk about here, Ty. Week 1, obviously starting off, Wednesday is the kickoff day this season for the NFL, with the Australia game being Thursday. The NFL decided, hey, let's get this Wednesday night game to be the kickoff between the Patriots and the Seahawks. Ty, what are your thoughts on, the NFL having an international game that needs to be played on a Thursday, because it's, I believe, like almost a whole day ahead. It's going to be like 12 or 1 o'clock in Australia when the game's being played on Thursday night here in the US. What are your thoughts on that and having a Wednesday night game be the kickoff?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, probably tough on some of the players, but they're going to go there well ahead of time to kind of adjust to the time zone. I just think it's cool to grow the game, right? We've seen how the NBA has really grown the game globally, and obviously the MLB is a global game, soccer is a global game. The NFL, is king in the US, but if they want to continue to expand and grow, and these players want to make more money, right? This is how you do it. You grow the game to a global market. So, once a year you got to play a game that's a little bit uncomfortable in a different time zone, and you make $10 more million a year because
Yep.
people in Australia are watching the game. I think it's a good trade-off, and I think it's cool to see them play in different venues and spread the game across the globe.
Yeah, and I have no gripes with it. The only really issue I have with it right now is that not every team has to do it. So I think that does provide like a little bit of a disadvantage to some teams versus the others. The teams that are traveling the most, that's a massive disadvantage. But I think, like you said, every team is going to have an international game here in probably the next 1 to 2 seasons, and then they'll add probably a second bye week, I imagine, because they're going to add another game in addition to that as well. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I do see an international week or international game for every team being installed here shortly. But anyways, like this Patriots Seahawks game, Super Bowl rematch, I don't mind that being the kickoff game. I think that's kind of what it should be at this point in the NFL. If the teams are already on the schedule, right? Because sometimes those teams won't be opponents in the upcoming season. It's not always a given. I do like that this is the kickoff game. But Ty, what is your other outside of those games on this week 1 slate? What are your favorite and least favorite matchups?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is going to be Buffalo and Houston, right? Just the juggernaut of Josh Allen versus this amazing defense in Houston. The storyline of can CJ Stroud finally figure it out after an awesome rookie season? Have they put enough weapons around Josh Allen, right? They had DJ Moore and Skylar Bell this offseason. So I think that will be, an awesome game. Obviously, a stinker of a game is just going to be Miami and the Raiders, right? Mendoza's probably not going
Yeah.
to play. Malik Willis doesn't really have much around him. So, that's kind of a toilet bowl for, Miami's probably hoping they lose so that they can have a higher pick next year and take one of the top tier quarterbacks. And then obviously, just a great game on Monday night, Denver, Kansas City. Was hoping for that one to be in Denver, but, we beat him in Arrowhead last year. And, we'll see how healthy Mahomes is, right? That seems to be that, that this gives us every indication that Pat Mahomes is going to be back week 1, but maybe not, right? Because they scheduled the Colts the following week in a primetime game. And Daniel Jones is not rumored to be back until October. So, is the NFL weighing, are some of these guys going to come back? They should be, in my opinion, especially at the quarterback position with guys like Daniel Jones. And we saw how effective he was for the Colts. And then when they lost him, how bad they turned out to be. Same thing with the Chiefs and Mahomes. So I think that, that tells me that he's going to be back. And I think Tampa and Cincinnati will be fun too. Two high-powered offenses, defenses that definitely improved this offseason as well, but just weren't great last year. And let's see how those defenses step up. And then is it just going to be a higher-powered 42-35 type of a game? So a lot of good games, not a lot of bad games in this slate,
Yeah.
especially just knowing what teams are going to be at this time.
Yeah, just a couple other games to shout out. I think that the Packers Vikings could be a fun matchup because it's that new Kyler Murray offense in Minnesota. You see how that responds. With Micah Parsons out, obviously, for the Packers, that could be a big matchup. And especially that could have impacts on the future in that division, in the standings, in that seat during the season. And then, I mean, I'm kind of interested to see Commanders, Eagles. Can the Eagles offense change it around if AJ Brown isn't there? How is that offense kind of setting up? In the Commanders, with a fully healthy team going into the season, are they back to what they were prior to this past season? And then obviously as a Saints fan, I'm very excited to see Saints Lions because I want to see if the Saints offense is going to be as high powered as it's, kind of shaping out up to be with the offseason that we had. The defense worries me a lot. How do they compete against a very tough Lions offense? I want to see that game. I think that'll be fun. But yeah, this 1 o'clock game or 1 o'clock slate has a lot of fun games on it. I think, like you said, I think Dolphins, Raiders, maybe Browns, Jaguars. Those are probably the two games that I really
Cardinals,
wouldn't.
Chargers.
Oh yeah, Cardinals,
That's a
Chargers is
s-
tough
it's
too.
bad.
That's a bad one. I mean,
Like
the
Browns, I mean, at
Chargers.
least they have a roster that can
Yeah,
compete with Jacksonville
outside of
besides
quarterback.
quarterback.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean, Deshaun Watson, who knows, right?
yeah. And then the Chargers, to me, like I don't know. A lot of people have them above the Broncos right now in divisional rankings, which it just doesn't make sense to me on any level. So I'm very underwhelmed by the Chargers. But anyways, moving on to the number of primetime games for each team here. Obviously, you see the Rams leading off with 7 games, then the Packers, Chiefs, Bills, and Seahawks with 6. The teams at the low side are the Jets, Cardinals, Titans, Dolphins, and Raiders with 0, and the Saints with 1, and the Browns with 1 as well. Ty, what are your thoughts on this? The primetime game disparity between teams and number of games? And then are you upset with the Broncos only having 3 games?
Yeah, well, first of all, we'll get into the primetime, slot for the Denver Broncos. I'm not even upset with the number of primetime games because I honestly hate watching Denver in primetime. It's way too much stress. But this whole primetime versus standalone game
Yeah.
is really starting to piss me off. Denver has 5 standalone games because they play on Black Friday and Christmas. I don't know about you, but I think Black Friday and Christmas are pretty prime time games.
Yeah.
So why not just call every game that's on a holiday or on a special night of the week where no one, if not 25 teams in the 26 teams in the league are playing, I think it's a prime time game. So, Denver technically would have 5 and some of these other numbers would jump. So I'm not really upset about the number of games that we have at prime time, especially just like I said, it's way too much stress. But, as far as the disparity, uh, I mean, you kind of look at it for the most part, it really is based on record. Some of those those 0, primetime games, that's, the number 1 pick, the number 2 pick, 3 pick, so on and so forth. A lot of really bad teams. The only one that got a ton is the Giants. And I think
Yeah.
that's, so much driven by, their market. Obviously, New York, there's a ton of people that are going to watch that game. And then just the hype around, their head coach Jackson Dart going into year 2. There is some hype in New York for the Giants versus there's not for the Jets. I mean, listen, I think that you could argue both ways where every team should have the opportunity to be seen on prime time, but at the end of the day, when you pool all this money together from all their TV revenue, right? They're going to make more money if they have better teams playing on prime time because people are going to want to watch those games. So it almost benefits some of these teams that finished poorly, the past season because they don't have to play in prime time. There's none of the everyone bashing them on Twitter, and then they get to share that huge pool of money because we get to watch, Seattle and the Patriots week 1 on prime time instead of having to watch the Jets and the Cardinals play on Thursday Night Football. So I see it both ways. I mean, honestly, when Denver was bad, I did not want to see them on primetime games. Um, I like it now because obviously it's fun. Like I mentioned, it's stressful, but it's still it's a sign of where your team is at. I just don't think some of these bad teams honestly even want to see their team playing on primetime because there's no hope. I could see where you're at with the Saints, wanting to see some more games and interested to hear your take on it too. But I mean, they were the 6th pick last year, right? There is a lot left up
Yeah.
in the air. They had a good offseason, but still it's a lot based on what they did last season.
Yeah, I definitely think that every team should have at least one. That way, every single fan base has one opportunity to see their team on the Friday or Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night lights, things like that. I think that's a good opportunity for fans out there. And I also think Sturb made a great point that it opens the audience, the people that just tune into primetime games to more teams. Because if you're just watching the Rams every single primetime game with 7, then I mean you're more limited in who you're viewing as a fan or as a more limited fan, I would say, if you're just watching the primetime games. But I do think that the disparity is a little bit too much in my eyes. I think maybe it should be a little bit more limited. Some teams should have like, 1 to 2. I think 1 should be the minimum, and then, like, 6 or 5 should be the maximum, and then it's kind of spread evenly throughout. But I mean, like you said, I don't mind the argument of best teams play on prime time because you are getting the best product, and with the Saints, I thought the Saints should have had 2 to maybe 3 primetime games this season. They do have an international game, like you said, that is a standalone, so maybe you count it as 2 instead of 1. But I do think 2 to 3 was kind of the number I thought they were gonna have because they had a few really solid matchups this season that I thought would have been exciting for fans out there. But I will say the Saints in their past primetime games really did stink it up. I mean, we had the Broncos a couple years ago. We all saw how that went. They had the Packers. We all saw how that went. Both of those games were massive blowouts, terrible for viewership, terrible product for the NFL. So I could definitely see why they're as low as they are. I do just think that the disparity in general of primetime games is a little bit high, in my opinion.
I mean, the thing is, though, for years and years and years, we complained about how bad Thursday night football was, and the viewership
Yeah,
was terrible. Like the NFL, the reality of this is, no matter what we want to say, the disparity should be this or that. The NFL responded to fans, right? Fans complain about
definitely.
how bad matchups are, right? Like people didn't watch that Denver Saints game past probably the first quarter.
It
People
was rough.
complained this past year about how bad the Denver game was against Vegas. And Denver
Mhm.
played down to Vegas, of course, but why was Vegas even on Thursday Night Football, right? Like some of these, I understand there's the historic piece of some of these rivalries, but people that are tuning into one game a week on Thursday or Sunday night or Monday night, whatever it may be, they want to see
Yeah.
those good teams, right? They don't really
Yeah.
care about watching all 32 teams. They want to watch the best games. They don't want to watch the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, and I will say it's definitely tough to predict, exactly what teams are going to be good at week 15, week 14. When you get later in the season, they're putting the best teams there because this is what is predicted to be the best primetime game. And obviously, throughout the schedule, throughout the season, injuries happen, things happen that can, make some games worse than others on the primetime slate. So it is tough. I definitely understand why this is tough as a schedule maker. Planning the best product weeks and months in advance. But I do wish it was a slightly smaller disparity. But I don't. I get the reasoning behind it for sure. Getting right into it, we're going to pull up a grid here. This is the massive schedule. So for your team, everyone out there listening or watching, actually just watching, you can look at this grid that we're pulling up. But it just shows kind of every team's. In the white is a 1 o'clock game, yellow is a 4 o'clock game, and then everything else is prime time, holidays, etc. I mean, you can see here the Saints have a shit ton of 1 o'clock games, only two, possibly three, obviously with the Week 18 if they get flexed to prime time with something with the playoff game against the Bucks or a
The
playoff
Jets.
on the line. The Jets
The
are
Jets is hilarious.
atrocious. I honestly I don't remember what gray is here. Um, I
Can't
don't
be
remember.
anything good.
Let me look real quick. Gray is 405, so they have two 405 games,
Okay.
but it's only because
They're
those
West
teams are.
Coast.
Yes, exactly. That's the only reasoning behind that. You kinda have to do that for the West Coast team when anytime they're playing on the West Coast, you gotta have it later, so it's closer to 1 o'clock for the away team or for the home team. The other teams, I'm trying to find teams that are really low.
Denver's got two
Cleveland.
1 o'clocks.
Denver only has 2 1 o'clock games this year?
Carolina and the
Oh,
Jets.
yeah,
Yep.
this is yeah, this is a nuts schedule. I'm trying to, for the 49ers, West Coast team, Seahawks, West Coast team, they both have a very limited 1 o'clock game schedule. But obviously, it's closer to 1 o'clock for them at home, so that makes sense. I'm trying to think of other East Coast teams. That the Bucks are relatively limited. The Falcons, the Panthers, the NFC South,
Giants have
the
a decent amount of
Giants.
1 o'clocks.
Yeah, they have a good amount. AFC East.
I mean,
Uh, the
Miami has a
the
crap ton.
Dolphins. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Dolphins have to. Every other team though is pretty widely spread out. So I do like the schedule, the way it's set up for the split, but among 4 o'clock prime time. Like you said, I think it was the Chiefs you said, right? Are starting off the season
Chiefs have
with a
one. I actually think I meant Denver. I think when I mentioned
Oh,
this,
yeah, looking at your
it's
team
actually
now.
Denver. Denver doesn't have a 1 o'clock game until week 9, which is pretty
Yeah,
insane.
that is
Seattle has
nuts.
one 1 o'clock game. No,
San
sorry,
Fran.
2. They have 2 as
San
well.
San Fran doesn't start off with a 1 o'clock game for a little while.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Eh, that's just pretty insane. I mean, I guess it's just, you want to there's been enough complaints about the 4 o'clock time slots too being some
Yeah.
like, you have so many good games in the 1 o'clock slate, and then the 4 o'clock is like just a dud with the Cardinals playing and stuff like that. I think the NFL, I mean, from what it looks like, right, looking at this grid, a lot of good teams are playing in prime time or 4 o'clock slots and not 1 o'clock slots. So
And
it's smart.
and I'm glad you brought that up. I'll switch us right over to the red zone early late splits here. That this is how many games are in the early 1 o'clock slate versus the 4 o'clock slate. Scott Hansen put this out there. 4 and 5 games to me is the perfect number of games for a red zone late slate because you're getting enough disparity in the games to kind of, if there's two stinkers, you get maybe two good games. But when it's limited to three, I think that limits your availability in the number of games. I think you could have all three games be pretty poor and you're just kind of shit out of luck. What are your thoughts on that, Ty?
I mean, listen, I don't know. Not having knowing what these 3 games are, I like 4 to 5. I think it's good. I think 4 is a
Yeah.
perfect number, like you mentioned. But if those are 3 bangers of a game,
Yeah,
you
then it's
can't
not
argue
bad.
with it, right? Like I'd have to look at the schedule and see because there's actually a lot. It looks like half the schedule is actually 3 o'clock splits. That might also be, more of like the international games, like more of those coming in, and
Yeah,
then
cutting out of
even
the
more
schedule.
primetime games with like Wednesday nights and Black Friday. It does seem like there's less and less Sunday games happening. So, but I think 4 is a good number. 3 just have to have 3 bangers of games.
Yeah, you just gotta hope they're good. And like you said, the international games are definitely cutting into this. The holiday games are cutting into most of these weeks
We have
here.
a Thanksgiving Eve game.
Yeah. I We'll talk about that in a second because I do have a holiday. Did I add the holiday thing here? I'll pull up the holiday schedule. We'll break that down quick before we do the international games, actually. Let me pull that up real quick. Because the holiday schedule slate this season, it's not bad. I mean, it's all
This is
good
a banger.
games, but it is very random that the Thanksgiving Eve game was kind of sprinkled into the Thanksgiving weekend or Thanksgiving week. But what are your thoughts on that, Ty? Thanksgiving Eve, you got the Packers and the Rams.
It's a great game, and I'll say this about Thanksgiving Eve, right? Everyone calls it Blackout Wednesday, at least the Midwest, Eastern, some of the Eastern states, right? People are home, people are out. Put a football game on the television. So I think
Yeah,
it makes sense, right? The NFL is just trying to widen the number of standalone games, but I think the schedule, across the board, really really good games. You got division rivalries, you got some of the juggernauts in the AFC and NFC. I mean, the only game that really has a chance of being a dud is Black Friday. Just depending on what the
yeah,
Steelers are, because pretty much every other team on this list has some factor to their team that will make them awesome, right? The Texans defense, the Cowboys offense, Philly has a good defense, right? They're across the board. There's just a lot of really, really good teams. So, minus injuries, I think this is about as good as you can get, especially I don't know if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, our Christmas Day schedule was horrendous. I mean,
it
like
was
every
bad.
game was really, really bad. It was the first year they did it on Netflix, and no one wanted to watch those games. And so you look at Christmas Day here, and you get a division rivalry, the divisional round rematch from last year with Buffalo and Denver, and then another division rivalry. I mean, yeah, this is really good stuff by the NFL.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on Netflix expanding to even more games? I believe they have the Australia game is theirs. I believe they got Christmas Day, and they also have the NFL honors now. What are your thoughts on and Netflix buying more of the NFL slates?
Yeah, I mean, it was just due to happen, right? I think Netflix is really making a huge push into the sports world, into the sports podcasting world. They have like Part of My Take and some of those other podcasts now. So they're really pushing into the sports world. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like it because they're like, I'm watching games on so many different things. I'm, lucky enough to just bump my parents' Netflix and all those
Yeah.
other accounts still. But it doesn't really phase me as long as, you put out a good product on the field. and your announcers aren't horrendous, I don't really care. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's fun.
And in my eyes too, I'd much rather pay for Netflix or share a Netflix with my family versus having to pay for the YouTube NFL
Yeah,
Sunday ticket, which is 100 no, it's honestly more than that. I think it's like $300 or whatever for a season, which, is a lot higher than paying for Netflix for a few months, especially the with ads or whatever it is for a few months is not bad at all.
they
So,
load up their talent too. Like like Netflix doesn't
yeah,
have a team, right? They get people like Kay Adams and RG3, and they
from
get Drew
across
Brees.
the
They get people from all over, and so I think that's pretty cool too to see. Like I think they had JJ Watt calling games who, you know, um,
might have, yeah.
they just have like really cool. They've done a great job of bringing in different talent.
Yeah, and looking at these games, I mean, you have I think 4 teams that have two holiday matchups. You got the Bears, the Packers, the Broncos, the Eagles, so 5 teams actually, and the Bills. So all 5 of those teams have multiple holiday games, which is fun for those fans. Utah included in that. I think that's pretty fun being able to watch
Yeah, I'm gonna try to go to
your team
Black
play.
Friday.
Yeah, that would be a good game to go to in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, other side of the state, but we
At
might make the drive out there.
Acrisure Stadium or
Heinz,
whatever it's
Heinz,
called.
bro. Don't disrespect it. It's Heinz.
It's so funny. I think it's so funny that, like, the brands buy stadiums that are iconically named for however long, and it just goes ignored,
Oh
that
yeah.
it's a new title. But that being said, we also do have a New Year's Eve game, Ty, Ravens versus the Bengals. I'm very interested to see if that interlaps with NCAA. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that college football is still talking about the expanding of the playoffs for this coming season, so I don't know how that will affect the schedule. But I think a lot of the New Year's Eve games are still the first round, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
So
typically.
I don't know. People will be watching all the games. I mean, yeah, people bring out your
There's
TV,
ways.
they throw it
There's yeah,
up.
there's
You
ways to
find a
go.
way, and I think that's a good game, right? Lamar and Joe. If Lamar and Joe are healthy at that point in the season, it's always a banger of a game. Even when Cincinnati's bad because their defense is bad, like Joe
Oh,
Burrow
yeah.
goes out and throws for 400 yards, and Jamar Chase has 250 on the Ravens. So these division rivalry games where they have top tier quarterbacks and top tier offensive weapons, um, I think are always really fun.
Yeah, it's kinda funny how I was looking, and there's so many tweets about, "I'm betting my whole life savings on one of these quarterbacks being out for this game because the last few seasons, we've seen both of these teams, their quarterbacks, Joe and Lamar, struggle to stay healthy late in the season, so very interested to see how that pans out if one of those quarterbacks is healthy by that time of year. Moving on, Ty, to the international slate here, it's honestly I think the games are getting better than what they have been in some years, but it's still not it's not the greatest games. The NFL isn't going to be giving the greatest matchups away, but I mean, you look at this slate: 49ers, Rams, the Ravens, Cowboys, Eagles, Jags, Patriots, Lions is pretty fun too, and maybe the Vikings, 49ers here. What are your thoughts on this slate?
Yeah, I don't think there's a bad team on this slate, right? It's not as good as some of the holiday ones because, the holiday ones are different, right? That's a regular time that everyone in the country is going to be watching it. A lot of
Yeah,
these are at 7 a.m. or, I guess the Australia games, but the London games are like 7 in the morning. So, but I mean, across the board, you get a division rivalry, you get two, fun offenses in the Ravens and the Cowboys. If Daniel Jones can be healthy and Jaden Daniels can be healthy, that's a great game. A lot of it hinges on health, but across the board, like probably the worst game is either the Paris game or the Madrid game. And if Tua can be a top 20 quarterback, that team is so talented they could be, pretty good. And if Aaron Rodgers comes back, that Paris game's good. So I don't really think there's a miss on this board. It just
yeah,
obviously depends on health. But again, this is another the NFL looking at how well that these international games have performed and the fan just interest in when the schedule releases, right? Because in the years past we've seen the schedule release and it's just been like, okay, well, I'm not going to watch that game at 7 in the
yeah.
morning. Now I'm going to get up for all of these games because they're really really solid games. So and I think it's fun that they're expanding where they're playing, right? We get a Spain game and a France game. I think they played in Spain last year, but they're just going to continue to expand where they're playing, and I think that's really fun too.
I do think it's very interesting to maybe discuss in the future. I know they're assigning team rights to certain, fan like countries. They're signing fan rights and things like that. I think each team, when they do go to the full international, every team has an international game. You got to assign these teams to different cities to be their home cities so that fans can kind of, like you have here in the US, you have home fans that builds team relationships even more. I think that would create like awesome relationships for fans internationally where they can associate fully to one team and anticipate that team going to their city once a year or once every 2 years, however they would have to set it up. I think that would create a lot more interactions for fans and could increase the viewership.
I mean, look how Jacksonville has done that pretty much in London, right? Like,
Yep.
their schedule in the second half, I think after the first 7 games, they only play back home
I think
3
twice.
times, I think.
Yeah, maybe
It's like
three.
3 home games back in Jacksonville, but, like, it's 2
Something
of
like
these
that.
games in London in back-to-back weeks are pretty much home games for them
Well,
with
technically,
the fandom
or
that they've kinda built over there
yeah,
and, the rest, right? They're gonna be so used to London, by that 2nd week
yeah,
that they'll be, more raring and ready to go than the 1st week.
yeah, and I think they did that because they have like the stadium construction or whatever, so they'll be in
Yeah,
maybe I
yeah.
think they said Orlando. I think Orlando, right, is where they're playing this season, their home games.
Mhm,
Perhaps, I think that's right. But yeah, I
mhm.
definitely think that Jacksonville, I mean, a lot of fans joking about, "Oh, just move them to London already," because that is the kind of the London team at this point in the NFL, but I think it was a good move for them, especially during this kind of season to have 2 over there versus, just playing in Orlando for a game where
I believe they
you're not
did
having
this
a lot of
last year
fans.
too.
They did. Yeah, it was them, and I think the Browns had
Yeah.
2 as well, international games, which that was bad for the fans that
Minnesota.
they're having to watch the
Minnesota
Browns too.
played
Minnesota,
in
yes.
Dublin and then London.
Yes, they didn't Minnesota play the Steelers in one of those?
Yes, yep.
I'm blanking on a lot of the international games from last year because I was not locked in on those. But I'm
They
excited to
weren't as
watch
good
the
as this
Saints
year.
yeah, I'm excited to watch the Saints early in the morning. Hopefully, Rodgers is back because that makes it like you said, that makes it a fun matchup. Moving on to the primetime games here, let's get right into Thursday night football first. Let's find it. Here we go. Thursday night football, Ty, you mentioned it earlier in the episode. Thursday night football for the last probably 5 years at least has been the rough slate. Everyone's, "Oh, I can't wait. I don't wanna watch Thursday night football because it's always shitty matchups." This year, you look at this slate, all of these matchups are pretty solid, Ty. What are your favorite matchups on this list and maybe least favorite as well?
Denver versus Seattle is going to be a great one, right? What should have been the Super Bowl had Bo Nix not been injured.
Yeah.
That'll be a super duper exciting game. I think that the Carolina game, just depends on the Carolina team that we get this year. Same with the Falcons game, right? Green Bay probably got 2 of the easiest Thursday night football games. I mean, the Pittsburgh and Cleveland, that's a lot closer than people probably want to admit, with
Mhm.
Rodgers at this point in his career and just the team that Cleveland's built up around Deshaun. I think that all the divisional games are obviously fun, but Detroit and Buffalo, and then Kansas City, that top across that top row, week 2, 7, 13, right? Getting to see Drake May versus Caleb, Buffalo versus Detroit, just two teams that always have so much hype around them, but seem to underperform. And then Kansas City and the Rams, right? If we remember back in, what was that, 2015, 2016? I think it was Thursday night football or Monday night football. Last time they had really two good offenses, just went at it. That was the game that they scored like 100 combined points. So with the way that the Rams are on offense and just having Pat Mahomes, that can be exciting. But it's also Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson versus the
Mhm.
Chiefs. So that adds in just another layer. So I think that whole top row and then Denver, Seattle are probably the top 4 games on here, and then just
Yeah.
Carolina, Atlanta, and Cleveland. Just depends on what kind of a team we get from them.
Yeah, Texans Eagles is an interesting game too in my eyes. I really the Texans could be they could be one of the latest undefeated teams this year just because they have such an absurd defense. It really just depends on CJ Stroud. The Jaguars, Ravens, I'm not really looking forward to that one too much. I will say I'm annoyed that every other NFC South team, we talked about this in the prime time, annoyed every NFC South prime time or every NFC South team got more than one primetime game. You see all of them on this Thursday night football slate. I think the Saints Bears could have been a really fun Thursday night football game. Maybe the Saints Lions, Saints Ravens. All three of those could have been fun matchups to add to this slate. But I don't mind it. I just annoying seeing the Foul Clowns, the Panthers, and the Bucks, who all didn't necessarily do too much better than the Saints this past season, being on this slate. But I understand it. Like you said, Ty,
Yeah.
we've settled the differences on that on the prime time.
The
So
Falcons are just one that I think,
they
eh,
could either be really good or really bad,
yeah, and I don't
depending.
know that they should have got as many as they did. Like,
Yeah,
I understand the roster's really, really good, but you're banking on two quarterbacks that haven't been great to, to perform. But Carolina makes sense, right? They won the division. They
yeah,
had some massive upgrades this offseason, especially on the defensive side of the football. They beat Green Bay last year. Um, I believe they beat Green Bay last year. And then
they did.
Tampa,
Yeah,
was exciting to start the year and then made some
they just
improvements. But
yeah they shit the
I
bed,
just don't
man.
think Atlanta makes a ton of sense. But if Tua, like I said, if Tua could be a top 20 quarterback, this team's so talented that it could
Yeah,
it could warrant a Thursday night football.
yeah. I think it'll be the Saints and Panthers at the top battling, but I think the Bucks will be right there, and then the Falcons, like you said,
Anyone.
just
It's anyone's divisions.
yeah, it should be a lot of fun to watch the NFC South. Moving on to the Sunday night football slate here. This is a fun slate as well. Obviously, I think a good amount of good matchups here. I think the Thursday night football slate honestly is more appealing on paper than some of these, which is surprising. I mean, that surprised me right off the bat because Sunday night football. When I think of Sunday night football, I'm thinking of the best of the best each week. I love the Sunday night football crew. I love the Sunday night football theme. It just there's something different about a crisp fall night. You turn on the TV and you hear the Sunday night football theme start playing. You see it is Carrie Underwood, right? I'm 90% sure. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Yeah, Carrie Underwood starts singing the anthem, not the national anthem, but the Sunday night football anthem. And you just get ready, like the goosebumps. You feel little goosebumps go down your body. You're ready to watch Sunday night football. You're excited. So I thought this would be the more, built out slate than Thursday night football, but there's still some good matchups here, Ty. Obviously, Bills Packers looks like a really good matchup. Chiefs Seahawks could be good depending on how both those teams are doing. And Broncos Rams, really really good matchups here. But the rest, I mean, it's not there's kind of a good team and then a team that could be a little bit lower. Cowboys Packers, I should have mentioned that one as well. But what are
Yep.
your thoughts on the rest of these
Micah.
games, Ty?
Yeah, I mean, I think in comparison to Thursday night football, like Thursday night football, I feel like there's a lot more like rivalries or teams that have kind of played
Yeah,
against each other, and there's been a ton of, competition there. This is just a little bit more of a random kind of schedule in my eyes.
yeah,
Like Minnesota and San Francisco and Mexico City is pretty random. Baltimore and Atlanta, but again, a lot of really good teams got primetime games, and that's going to show up, in the schedule. I just think
mhm,
at some point they couldn't be pitting division foes, and they had to settle somewhere. But I still think that there's a lot of really good matchups. Like you mentioned, those three are probably the best ones. New England, LA could be pretty good. Um, probably the worst one would be the Ravens and Falcons.
yeah.
Just kind of
That's a
looking
rough one.
across here, or maybe, you know, uh, Minnesota is so interesting because they could be terrible, right? They very well could be terrible, just like they were last year. But this hype around Kyler Murray and what he can be there, just how happy they have been with him thus far, I think really has the opportunity to make a lot of these games a lot more exciting, right? Like Kevin O'Connell and Kyle Shanahan battling it out in Mexico City with Kyler Murray
Yeah,
and Brock Purdy, two guys that just kind of were doubted as quarterbacks, and they've made them look so great. And then you get another division rivalry game with Detroit and Kyler Murray, has an opportunity to beat the Lions. So I think that they are a very interesting team with the amount of primetime games that they got. And I think, really banking on Kyler Murray having a ton of success, but it sounds like things are going well for him and in Minnesota thus far.
it seems so. It seems that way, and so I think this slate is pretty solid. And obviously, Week 18, undetermined. It'll be a rivalry game between whichever teams are still fighting for the playoff spot. I do think that'll be probably the NFC South, maybe the NFC North,
Or Denver, LA.
NFC Denver. Yeah, look. I think the Broncos are a notch above, and I'm very very surprised by the odds being heavily against the Broncos right now for that division. I'm very
We'll
shocked
take
by
it.
that. I mean, we've talked about that in the couple, or was it last week? I think it was last week. We did our NFL team tiers. We broke that down, but I do not get the doubtfulness behind the
The
Broncos
only
after
thing I
adding
could
Waddle.
say is the schedule is very hard, and
Yeah, they have
there's
a
a
tough
chance
schedule.
that maybe we lose a couple and records are close just because they've had a little bit easier of a schedule having the 2 seed schedule versus the 1 seed. But um, we all got to play the same divisions, right? We all the Kansas City, LA, us, we got to play the NFC West, we got to play the AFC East, right? So there's a lot of common opponents. They have a similarly hard schedule, and
Yeah.
it's just continuing to hate on Bo Nix and bet against the Denver Broncos.
And also this, I feel like the Chiefs, when I look at their schedule, their front of the schedule is a little bit more easy than the Broncos schedule, and then the bottom half of the schedule is tough for them. So I think maybe you see like the Broncos. Where are the Broncos Chiefs playing? Are they both earlier?
Week 1 and week 8.
Oh, so they're both earlier, so that won't be them. If I have to see Chiefs Raiders on week 18 Sunday Night Football because the Chiefs are contending, I would be so upset. I'd be
No, they won't do that. Come
distraught.
on.
Yeah,
The
no,
Raiders
hopefully
aren't going to be
not.
contending. Holy.
No, they will not be contending. It would be mainly just if the Chiefs are the last playoff team possibly fighting for a spot, but I don't see that necessarily happening. Moving on to Monday Night Football here, we finally see some justice for the New Orleans Saints. Week 4 against the Foul Clowns. I was bringing this up to the group chat that the Saints, Falcons, obviously 20 years ago, they had the rebirth moment when Steve Gleason blocked the punt in New Orleans after the hurricane, after the Saints' first game back in the Dome. I thought it was going to be week 3 because that is technically when that happened 20 years ago, and it would have been 3 years from 20 years ago that it happened instead of 10. But they did still make it the week 4 Monday Night Football game. All these other games are pretty solid as well. I think Monday Night Football did a good job getting these games pretty well slated to be solid matchups outside of, honestly, looking at it, I don't really see a no, Giants Lions might be a little bit of a bad matchup. Steelers Jaguars, that's not a great game. But everything else is pretty solid. I mean, Panthers Bucks. Ty, what are your thoughts on this Monday Night Football slate? What are your least and most favorite games?
I think New England, Kansas City could be a fun one, just depending on the Kansas City team that we get. And I think, Green Bay, Houston could be a lot of fun. Chicago, Seattle, all the division rivalry games are awesome. Buffalo, LA, really, really good. Um, I kind of hate to say it, but your game might be one of the worst ones on here
It could
besides
it could be,
Pittsburgh and
yeah.
Jacksonville. I'm surprised Jacksonville got as many. I know they made the playoffs, but they
Yeah.
had a horrendous offseason. I don't
It had to
know.
be one of the worst in the league, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know what kind of a team that they're going to be. Between the draft and all the guys they lost in free agency and didn't replace, Pittsburgh, I mean, today might be a better team with Will Howard.
The Jaguars just didn't make any sense because they just let their best players walk. We're like, yeah, we'll just, you know, do whatever next season. I don't I just didn't understand their matchups. Yeah, Saints Falcons. In my opinion, the Saints had so many other better matchups for primetime football if they really wanted to pick a game for Saints for primetime football, but they wanted to give this matchup to just, commemorate that moment and have the 20th anniversary, which I'm fine with, no complaints here. I just hope it's better than the 10th anniversary because the Saints got schmacked um 10 years ago for the 10th anniversary. Anyways, that is going to do it for our schedule reactions episode. If you guys have any thoughts, comment down below. Ty, do you have any closing thoughts for the schedule?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know Denver has a really really tough schedule to start and close, but I'm excited to see them compete against some of the best because I think last season, right, it was a little bit easier of a schedule at times, right, and Denver kind of got some slack for that. Same with New England, right? New England's got a lot tougher schedule, so I'm excited to see some of these young teams that were competitive last year, go toe to toe with some of the teams that we
Mhm.
think are the best in the NFL, right? Can the New England Patriots have that success again? Can Denver have that success again? I think it's going to really start to paint a narrative about some of these young quarterbacks that were being really hyped up last year or being, beat up last year. It's awesome to see. I mean, that's just kind of how the schedule works. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I'm excited for that.
And what is your over under for the Broncos win loss?
I would probably put it at. Oh, well, I'll say this. I don't know if I have an over under quite. I dropped my schedule prediction, or excuse me, my record prediction the other day. I had them at 13 wins, I believe. I can see them anywhere from 10 to 15, right? I think
Yeah.
that there's a long stretch of the schedule there where it gets really easy. It's just the first six and the last three are really tough. I think we'll definitely split with the Chargers. We usually lose at least one to them. I think we have a good opportunity to sweep the Chiefs, and then just some of those other teams. Right? I said I took them at 13. It was really hard for me to pick against them. Uh, I took Buffalo on the road on Christmas Day, and I took Seattle on the road on Thursday Night Football. It was really hard for me to say Denver's going to lose those games at home. So I would say anywhere from 10 to 15 wins is the you know area for Denver, probably closer to 12 to 13.
Yeah, I have the Saints at I think I would say the floor for them because their schedule is relatively easy. I would say 7, and then the ceiling I put up to like 11. But realistically, I think my predictions right now is 10 and 7. Over under would put at 8.5, and I would bet the over on that. So very excited to see both of our teams this upcoming season. You guys know where to find us on social media at Jenks Island and wherever you get your podcast at Jenks Island as well. We will see you guys next week with I think our quarterback rankings episode. If we can
Yep.
all make it, we're gonna make that happen for you guys. So we'll see you next week.